It began with a hammer, a single strike against an old courthouse wall in Louisiana that hadn't heard a sound in nearly half a century. The dust fell slow, gray as ash, and what it revealed would unravel generations of silence. Inside that wall, hidden behind layers of plaster and pride, was a piece of paper, folded, brittle, and signed by 7 men who thought history would forget their names. The date read March 14th, 1853. The ink recorded the sale of a man, the price beside it, 12 cents, not $12, not 12 gold pieces, 12 copper coins, the cost of a loaf of bread. What those men didn't know was that one day another man would find their secret, and when he did, the truth would bleed through history like ink through linen, refusing to stay buried. Tonight, we uncover that truth. And what happened to the man who was sold for less than a handful of change? Before we tear down the wall of silence those men built, I need you to do one thing. If stories like this, stories they tried to erase, matter to you, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Because what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a mirror. Leave a comment with where you're listening from. Let's see how far truth can travel when silence finally breaks. The courthouse in St. Helena Parish rose like a monument to hypocrisy. Whitewashed walls, brass hinges, and inside rows of men pretending that law was something nobler than the cruelty it disguised. Outside, the morning air clung heavy with heat and the smell of sugarcane smoke. Men stood in clusters, boots sunk in mud, waiting for the auction bell. No one spoke of what they were about to witness. They didn't need to. Judge Amos Crenshaw entered first, his robe swaying like a shroud. 60 years had stiffened his spine and hollowed his soul, but he still carried the authority of a pulpit. Every man there feared his silence more than his words. The bell rang once, sharp, final. Nathaniel Pewitt, the clerk, cleared his throat and unrolled the parchment. Lot number 4, he announced. Male, age 26, trained laborer, healthy. His voice carried the rhythm of routine. The man stood alone beside the podium, shackles at his wrists, chains at his ankles. He looked neither defiant nor broken, just alive in a way that dared anyone to define him as property. Duncan's eyes narrowed. He wasn't here for money. He was here for vengeance. This sale was his sermon, and every witness was part of the congregation. "Opening bid," Pewitt called. 12 cents. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 12 cents? Even the men who trafficked in flesh shifted uncomfortably. The average field hand fetched hundreds. This was mockery disguised as commerce. Judge Crenshaw dipped his quill into ink, noting the bid without emotion. His script was perfect, precise. Years of practice had made the act of recording evil as natural as breathing. Duncan folded his hands behind his back. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth, "it seems none of you value him even that much." The words hung heavy, dripping with contempt and calculation. From the edge of the square, a figure stepped forward. A traveler's coat, mud on his boots, hat brim low. The stranger's voice broke the silence. "I'll pay it." Heads turned. The stranger's eyes were pale, sharp. He walked toward the podium without hurry, as though time itself belonged to him. 12 cents, he repeated, in coin. Pewitt hesitated, glancing toward the judge. Crenshaw gave a curt nod. Legal tender was legal tender, no matter how absurd the amount. Duncan's smile faded. "You're far from home, sir," he said. "What interest could you possibly have here?" The stranger met his gaze. "I don't like to see good men sold like livestock." The words were calm, but they carried weight, the kind of weight that made other men uneasy. Silas Guthrie spat into the dirt. "You call that one good?" he sneered. "He's been nothing but trouble since the day he could stand." The stranger turned slightly. "Then maybe the trouble isn't him," he said. "Maybe it's the men who think they can own him." Laughter didn't follow. The crowd shifted, restless. In that moment, the game Duncan planned had changed. The stranger wasn't just interrupting, it felt as if he were rewriting the rules entirely. Pewitt looked down at the table. 12 cents once, 12 cents twice. The hammer fell. Sold. The echo of the gavel was swallowed by the wind. The stranger, Isaiah Mercer, though no one yet knew the name, handed over the coins, counted slow and deliberate. Each one landed with a metallic ring, like the tolling of a clock counting down fate. The chain was struck loose. The man looked at Mercer, confused. Gratitude warred with disbelief. Mercer said nothing, only placed a steadying hand on his shoulder and led him away. Behind them, Duncan spoke quietly to Silas Guthrie. "Follow him," he said. "Find out who he is. No one buys my property without consequence." Silas nodded once. "Consider it done." The words were cold enough to frost the humid air. That night, the courthouse emptied, but Duncan remained at his desk. The lamplight carved his face into stone. He took a pen, signed a second copy of the deed, and slipped it into a drawer locked with brass. Underneath, he placed a single copper coin, a marker, a promise. For Duncan Fairholme, every act of cruelty was an act of order, a world restored to the hierarchy he believed divine. Meanwhile, Isaiah Mercer guided the freedman north through back roads and swamps. He said little, watching the shadows. He knew the chase would come. He knew men like Duncan didn't forget humiliation. At the river crossing, Mercer paused. "You can rest here," he said. "But when dawn comes, keep moving. Don't stop until the land stops speaking with Duncan's voice." The man nodded, silent but resolute. He had no name left. Duncan had erased it from the ledgers, but he still had breath, and that was enough. Mercer turned his horse south, back toward St. Helena. The easy path was gone. He was walking straight into the jaws of the men he had just defied. By sunrise, word had spread. The judge heard whispers of the stranger. The overseer sharpened his knife. And Duncan, ever patient, smiled as he lit his cigar. "Let him run," he murmured. "Every man who runs shows me where he'll hide." The courthouse bell rang again, but this time there was no auction, no audience, just echoes of men convincing themselves that law and morality were the same thing. And somewhere between the river and the fields, Isaiah Mercer's trail began to vanish beneath the fog. The first act of defiance was done, but the reckoning had only just begun. For every coin spent that morning, 100 debts had just been written in blood. Isaiah Mercer rode through the marshlands as the dawn peeled across the horizon like torn silk. The fog clung to his coat, wet and heavy, the river's breath crawling up his spine. The horse beneath him was exhausted, hooves sucking at the mud with every step. Mercer didn't push it harder. He'd learned long ago that in places like this, haste got a man killed quicker than bullets. Behind him, the sound of dogs echoed faintly, distant but real. He didn't look back. A man who looked back lost the rhythm of his escape, and rhythm was survival. He followed the waterline north until it bled into pine and silence. The swamp gave way to land too wild for plantations, too empty for law. He'd always preferred such places. They didn't ask questions. By midday, the sun broke through the canopy, a pale gold eye watching him. Mercer dismounted, letting the horse drink from a shallow creek. His reflection in the water looked older than memory. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, one he'd earned years before on a night no man spoke about, a reminder of the cost of pretending to be righteous. He knelt beside the creek, splashing hhis face. The water was cold enough to burn. For a moment, he saw not himself, but the faces of men he'd left behind. Brothers, soldiers, ghosts. The rustle of brush snapped him back. Mercer's hand went to the revolver at his hip, but he didn't draw. Instead, he waited, listening. Patience was his only weapon now. A figure stepped from the trees. A boy, no older than 16, hat crooked, holding a rifle that shook in his hands. "You're trespassing," the boy said. His voice cracked with fear and pride. Mercer raised both palms. "Just passing through," he said, "looking for the road to Port Allen." "There's no road," the boy muttered. "Just swamp and snakes, and men who don't belong." He leveled the rifle higher, like a challenge he didn't fully understand. Mercer's gaze softened. "What's your name, son?" "Eli," the boy said. "Eli Mathers." Mercer nodded. "Your father close by?" Eli hesitated, eyes darting toward the tree line. That was answer enough. Mercer lowered his hands. "You keep that rifle pointed steady," he said quietly. "But don't pull it unless you plan to use it." The boy frowned. "You talk like a preacher." Mercer almost laughed. "Used to be something close," he said. "Now I just talk like a man who's seen too many funerals." Eli studied him, uncertain. "You one of them hunters?" Mercer shook his head. "No. Just a man who paid for something and isn't sure what it cost him yet." The boy blinked, confused. Before he could speak again, a sharp crack rang through the woods. A rifle shot, far but unmistakable. Eli jumped. Mercer didn't. "Who's after you?" Eli asked. "Men who mistake law for justice," Mercer replied. He mounted the horse again, eyes scanning the trees. "You should go home, boy. This trail's turning bad." Eli hesitated. "Ain't safe for you neither." Mercer smiled faintly. "Safety's a luxury I sold a long time ago." He rode off, leaving the boy in the clearing, rifle still shaking in his grip. The woods grew darker as evening came. Mercer followed the sound of running water until he found the ruins of a mill, half swallowed by vines. The roof had collapsed, but the brick walls still stood like ribs around a heart that refused to die. He tethered the horse inside and built a small fire. Smoke curled through the cracks, carrying the scent of cedar and memory. Mercer took out a small tin from his coat, inside a folded paper, creased from years of being hidden. It wasn't the receipt. It was a letter, unsent, unfinished. He unfolded it, reading the words he'd written long ago. "To whoever finds this," it began, "know that I tried." He stopped there. He'd never been able to finish the sentence. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Too careful to be an animal. Mercer slid the paper back into his pocket and drew his revolver. "Come out," he said. A man stepped from the shadows. Broad shoulders, weathered face, eyes like a storm over the river. "Didn't think I'd find you this far out," he said. His voice carried the rhythm of cruelty. "Silas," Mercer said flatly. "I was wondering when you'd show." Silas Guthrie smiled without warmth. "You made quite a scene at the courthouse." Mercer holstered the gun. 12 cents worth of trouble, wasn't it?" "More," Silas said. "Much more. Duncan's not pleased. He says you stole from him." "I bought a man," Mercer said. "Paid the price they set. That's law, isn't it?" Silas laughed. "You think law matters? Law's just the story men like Duncan tell to sleep at night?" Mercer stood. "Then maybe it's time someone rewrote the story." Silas stepped closer. "You're not a savior, Isaiah. You're just another man trying to atone in a world that doesn't keep receipts." Mercer's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe," he said. "But I'm still standing. That counts for something." The two men circled each other in the dying firelight. Years of shared history hung between them. Knights in uniform, lies told for pay, blood spilled under flags that meant nothing now. "You could have walked away," Silas said. "Could have stayed forgotten." Mercer shook his head. Some debts chase you even when you stop running. Silas raised his pistol. Then let's settle yours. Mercer didn't move. The fire popped once, loud as judgment. If you shoot, he said, make sure it matters. Silas hesitated. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of choices already made. Then he lowered the gun. Not tonight, he said. You're not worth the bullet yet. He turned, disappearing into the dark. The woods swallowed him, leaving only the sound of the river and the whisper of wind through the ruins. Mercer sat back down, staring into the fire. The flame's reflection danced in his eyes like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Tomorrow would bring more hunters, more silence, more ghosts. But tonight, he allowed himself one small mercy, a moment to breathe, to exist without being hunted or haunted. And somewhere beyond the marsh, Duncan Fairholme sat in his study, pouring brandy into crystal, smiling at the map spread before him. He already knew where Mercer would run next, because the stranger who shouldn't exist was never meant to survive. He was meant to be found, and the game had only just begun. The night swallowed Isaiah Mercer whole. He rode hard through the swamp, every hoofbeat echoing against the pulse in his chest. The moon hung low, pale as regret, guiding him through the dark. He didn't look back. Behind him lay the courthouse, the sale, the man he freed, and the empire of cruelty waiting to collapse under its own lies. Ahead, only fog and a promise he couldn't keep. By dawn, the trees thinned. He crossed a bridge half-eaten by time, the boards moaning under his weight. The river beneath reflected nothing. It swallowed light, like guilt swallowing memory. Mercer stopped at the far bank. He dismounted, kneeling by the water's edge, splashing his face. The cold stabbed through his skull, dragging him out of exhaustion. He stared at his reflection, unrecognizable beneath grime and regret. He'd been a soldier once, a loyal one, back when men believed obedience made them righteous. But loyalty had a cost, and Mercer had paid in names he'd rather forget. A gunshot cracked the morning. He dropped flat, drawing his revolver. Smoke rose from the ridge behind him. A rider. Just one. He waited, heartbeat steadying, eyes fixed on the tree line. The horse appeared, a dark figure against the light. Not Silas. Too small, too fast. The rider wore a coat of gray wool and carried no flag. Mercer aimed, then paused. The man waved a white rag. "Don't shoot!" the stranger shouted, voice strained. "I've got word!" Mercer didn't lower the gun. "Word from who?" "From a man who paid too much for 12 cents, the stranger said. His tone was grim, his hands steady. "He said you'd know what that means." Mercer's jaw tightened. He holstered the gun and gestured for him to dismount. "Talk." Mercer nodded. "Then I'll make sure they don't." He packed the saddle, tying it tight. Rowe hesitated. "You really think you can outrun Duncan Fairholme?" Mercer's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "I don't have to outrun him. I just have to make him bleed first." Rowe stared. "You're going back?" Mercer didn't answer. He mounted, turning the horse east toward the marsh. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of rot and thunder. "Tell whoever sent you," he said, "that I'm ending this." Rowe called after him, but Mercer was already gone. The swamp closed behind him like a door. By midday, rain began to fall, soft at first, then relentless. Mercer rode through it, coat soaked, hat brim dripping. The downpour erased tracks and sins alike. He reached a ridge overlooking Bellamont Plantation. The fields lay empty, the cabins abandoned. Only the mansion still breathed, its windows lit with the glow of men who believed themselves untouchable. Mercer dismounted, tying the reins to a fence post. He moved like shadow, silent through the wet grass. He knew this place. Every inch, every scream it had absorbed, it had. Behind Duncan, movement. Silas Guthrie, stepping from the shadows, rifle in hand. "I told you he'd come," Silas said. "He always does." Mercer didn't turn. "You should have pulled the trigger back at the mill." Silas chuckled. "And missed the pleasure of watching you crawl back here? Not a chance." Duncan stood calm as a sermon. "Put the gun down, Isaiah. You're tired. You're done. History doesn't care about men like you." Mercer's voice hardened. "History remembers receipts." Duncan blinked. "What?" Mercer tossed a folded paper onto the desk. "The copy you thought was burned. Found it in your overseer's ledger. 7 signatures. 12 cents. For the first time, Duncan's composure faltered. His fingers twitched. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, I do," Mercer said. "I'm making sure you live long enough to watch everything you built collapse." Silas moved first. The rifle lifted. Mercer ducked, firing once. The bullet tore through Silas's shoulder, spinning him backward into the fireplace. He roared in pain, clutching the wound. He stood there, breathing hard, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The paper on the desk fluttered from the draft, the ink bleeding into itself like history rewriting its own shame. Mercer pocketed the receipt. He stepped over Duncan's body and walked into the rain. Each drop felt heavier than the last, as if the sky itself bore witness. Behind him, the fire spread, consuming the mansion room by room. The pillars cracked, the roof folded inward. By the time dawn came, Bellamont was nothing but ash and memory. Mercer didn't look back. He rode toward the horizon, the receipt pressed against his chest. He knew it wasn't over. Truth never died quietly. It waited for the next man to unearth it. And miles away, in a courthouse cellar, a clerk lit his lamp and began sorting records. Among the dust and ink, a name glimmered faintly. Isaiah Mercer. He paused, frowning, before slipping the paper into a separate drawer marked Lost Transactions. The law had spoken. The ledger was closed. But the story, like all truths buried by men, was far from finished. And the price of 12 cents would echo through generations until the last man finally remembered what it really bought. The courthouse had stood for almost half a century, its walls soaked with humidity and silence. No one remembered who laid its foundation. No one wanted to remember what it was built to hide. It was 1899, and the building was being repaired after a storm tore part of its roof away. A crew of 6 men arrived with hammers, nails, and no idea they were walking into history's breath. Samuel Harlow, the foreman, was the kind of man who respected walls. He'd spent his life building them, between fields, between men, between truths. But that morning, his hammer struck something hollow. He frowned. The sound was off, like metal against bone. He hit the spot again. Dust fell in a thin gray sheet. Beneath the plaster, something waited, a cavity, small, deliberate. "Bring me the chisel," he said. His crew obeyed. The blade bit through plaster, revealing a square void packed with old cloth. Samuel reached in, fingers trembling, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilskin. The men gathered around. "What is it?" one asked. Samuel didn't answer. He peeled the layers back, careful not to tear. Inside was a folded paper, its edges blackened by moisture but the seal still visible. St. Helena Parish, 1853. Samuel squinted at the faded ink. "Receipt of sale," he read aloud. "Property, male, 26. Price, 12 cents. His voice faltered on the last words, like a man realizing too late that he'd just spoken a curse aloud. The foreman folded the paper again. "We didn't find this," he said. "Not officially." But even as he spoke, he knew the truth couldn't be buried twice. That night, he sat in his small boarding room above the tavern, the paper laid out on the table beside his supper. The ink caught the light, glimmering like veins of guilt. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that name, Mercer, and the sum that mocked it. 12 cents. The price of a life. The cost of a conscience. By morning, word had spread. The courthouse clerk, a man named Ellis Ward, came knocking with the sheriff in tow. They wanted the paper. "Parish property," Ward said smoothly. "Historical interest." Samuel hesitated, the folded document heavy in his palm. "What happens to it?" he asked. "It'll be cataloged," Ward said. "Filed." But Samuel saw the look in his eyes, the look of a man already burying something. He handed it over, but not before slipping a small scrap into his pocket, a torn edge of the original, marked with a single name, Duncan Fairholme. Weeks passed. The courthouse reopened. The receipt vanished. Records showed nothing. Ward transferred to another parish soon after, but the story refused to die. Years later, in 1932, Samuel's grandson, Henry Harlow, found the scrap among his grandfather's things. The paper had yellowed, the ink faint, but the name was still readable. Henry was a schoolteacher. He believed in the truth. He brought it to the parish newspaper. They printed a single column, small and cautious. Historic receipt discovered. Possible evidence of forgotten transaction. Few paid attention. But one man did, a historian named Elias Morton. Morton traveled to St. Helena himself. He asked questions no one wanted answered. The courthouse janitor told him about the storm repairs, about Samuel, about the strange night no one spoke of again. Morton dug deeper. He found Isaiah Mercer's name in a military record. Veteran, discharged under dishonor, vanished without a trace. Then he found Duncan Fairholme's estate inventory, burned in 1853, the same year Mercer disappeared. He pieced together fragments, a sale, a shooting, a house fire. He realized the receipt wasn't just evidence. It was confession. the story of a man who defied his world and paid for it in obscurity. Morton wrote an article titled The Price of a Life. It ran in a small regional paper in 1935. The reaction was quiet, but the truth had cracked the surface again, like roots breaking through stone. Decades later, in 1978, the courthouse was renovated again. A maintenance worker named Thomas Ray found another hidden gap in the wall, smaller this time, but deliberate. Inside lay a tin box. He opened it with a screwdriver. Inside was a second document, almost identical to the first, but this one bore something different, a smear of blood in the corner, dark but unmistakable. The paper's edges were brittle, but the writing endured. The same 7 signatures, the same price. But beneath them, in faint pencil, new words had been added. He bought his freedom and paid in fire. Thomas handed it to the curator of the local museum, who archived it under recovered artifacts, undated. The file number was miswritten, the record misplaced. The pattern repeated, truth found, truth buried. By the early 2000s, the courthouse became a museum. School groups visited, men in suits gave speeches about progress, and behind glass in a quiet corner hung the first receipt, preserved at last. Visitors leaned close, reading the faint ink. 12 cents. Some frowned. Some shook their heads. Few understood that they were looking at a mirror, not of history, but of themselves. An old docent named Graham Lee stood near the case each day. He'd memorized the words. He told anyone who asked that the story wasn't about ownership, but about how easily men sell their mercy. When the museum closed each night, Graham lingered by the display. Sometimes, when the lights dimmed, he swore he could hear something, a hammer strike, faint and rhythmic, coming from inside the walls. He'd tell no one. Some truths, he thought, demand silence to stay alive. But every evening he whispered one line before leaving. He tried to stop it. The courthouse still stands. The paint flakes. The floors creak. And behind its walls, between dust and time, history breathes in shallow, endless rhythm. 12 cents, 7 signatures. One man who refused to stay forgotten. And the sound of hammers, faint but steady, still echoing through the bones of the building, reminding anyone who dares to listen that silence is the only crime that never dies.